Hi guys, we're back with yet another reaction, and today we are going to be reacting to Geography Now, Indonesia.
This is gonna be the first time we're reacting to
Indonesia? Yeah, it's the first time, and I personally don't know much about it. I'm not sure if you do. Do you know much about it?
I've been to Indonesia,
Oh, okay.
but I'm not really seems like know a lot much about it. But
Yeah, and I'm sure there's so much more you can learn about too.
yeah, it's
But-
just a very nice country.
Yeah, well, let's get into it.
Hey everybody, so if you don't know anything about Indonesia, basically
like
all
this
you have
guy.
to know is that it's kind of
Yeah,
like
he
the
just
Hawaii
talks
of the
so
Muslim
fast.
world, but it's like huge. It's like the biggest state, and with orangutans. And that's it, just no punchline. Let's just go to the intro song.
It's time to learn geography.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbie. So as some of you know, I've been to Indonesia one time on one island for like 3 hours. I ate one dish, so basically I'm like the Indonesia expert, right? Well, if not, I'm kind of like the only guy on YouTube doing full profile videos like this. So for now, you'll just have to kind of deal with me for like the next 12 or so minutes. Woohoo! Default. All right, so again, if you don't know anything about Indonesia, it's basically like if the Middle East and South Asia had an incredibly colorful, loud, somewhat explosive set of babies. Like thousands of them. Okay, that doesn't really help. First of all, Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago nation located right where the Indian Ocean meets the Pacific Ocean on the incredibly clustered set
didn't
of
know
islands
this
making
before.
6 countries known commonly as Nusantara or the Malay Archipelago. Indonesian Archipelago. Sure, whatever makes you happy. Indonesia actually has land borders with 3 of these countries, East Timor, Papua New Guinea, and Malaysia, on the biggest island, Borneo or Kalimantan, which is one of the world's only 2
I've never
triple
heard of
split
Kalimantan.
nation islands.
Me
The other
neither.
one being Cyprus. Although technically if you include the UN buffer zone, it's kind of like 4 entities, but the UN isn't a country, whatever, just watch the Cyprus episode. The country is divided into 34 provinces, 5 of which have special administrative statuses, with the capital and most populous city, Jakarta, located on Java, the world's most populous island with nearly half of the entire population of Indonesia in it. The largest cities after
gosh.
Jakarta are
Yeah, it's a
Surabaya
lot of
and
people
Bandung,
in
both located on
Indonesia.
Java Island, and Medan, located on Sumatra. Jakarta
Oh, that's
Soekarno
pretty.
Hatta International, Bali's Ngurah Rai International, and Despansar, and Surabaya's Juanda International. Now here's where things get a little speculative. Today, there are still arguments claimed as to exactly how many islands
beautiful.
Indonesia has. The National Coordinating Agency for Surveying and Mapping says Indonesia has about 13,500. The National Institute of Aeronautics and Space Agency says that it has about 18,300, whereas the Indonesian government claims about 17,500. But wherever the point is, there's a lot of them.
It's
Over
so
8,800 have names, and over 900 of them are permanently inhabited. You would think they are the country with the most islands, but surprisingly, Finland and Canada beat them. But a lot of their islands are kind of like boop-a-doop, little islands in the lakes. So does it really count? I guess. Now let's talk about the 5 special administrative provinces. They are Aceh, Yogyakarta, West Papua and Papua, and the capital Jakarta. Now, no surprise, the capital Jakarta acts as its own political entity. Lots of countries do that. But what about the others? First, Aceh. Aceh is kind of like the black sheep of Indonesia. It's the only province in which Sharia law is fully implemented. Also, they kind of have like a ton of
Interesting.
oil, so yeah, they've kind of asserted a very independent ideology that sets them apart as autonomous from the rest of Indonesia. Then you have Yogyakarta, which is the only region that is still governed by a pre-colonial monarchy. The Sultan of Yogyakarta, who acts as a hereditary governor.
There's a lot
Otherwise,
of
we get the 2
temple there.
Papuas, which collectively
bet.
used to be the province
very
called Iri and
beautiful.
Jaya, but then in 2003 they got split into 2. Basically, this is the place that has the least in common with the rest of Indonesia. It has a culture and background closer to their cousins across the border in Papua New Guinea. So then why is this part of Indonesia? Well, long story short, Indonesia was basically like, well, now that we have our full sovereignty, we get everything that the Dutch colonized. But the people of Papua were not too happy, so then Indonesia was like, all right, we'll give you a vote to stay or leave. However, we would strongly implore you to make the right decision. So they voted to stay in. A lot of people complained. There's still some current opposition, and to this day, the area has a relatively high level of autonomy, and the government kind of
That's
just leaves them alone,
interesting.
except for when it comes to mining for resources. Oh, and the South Maluku area also kind of has like an independence dispute thing kind of going on, but the major opponents to the Indonesian government are primarily based in the Netherlands. Then you have the strange Riau Islands, which look like they should belong to Malaysia, but they don't, even though they have a strong Malay-derived culture. Then you have the Ambalat Sea Block, which has a ton of
interesting.
oil that both they and Malaysia argue over. So that essentially covers most of the administrative divisions of Indonesia. Some of the most notable spots of interest in Indonesia might include the National Monument and Museum, Royal Keraton na Yogyakarta Palace, Ratu Boko, the Magelang and chicken-shaped churches, Borobudur, disputed to be the
What?
largest Buddhist
That's
temple
so
in the
pretty.
world, Maimun Palace, the Taman Sari Underground Mosque,
That
the
is too,
Equator
that's
Monument,
interesting.
the Pura Ulun Danu Brata
Oh
I've been
my
there.
Temples,
I've been
That's
there.
beautiful.
Pura
That's
Ulun
so
Danu the Batan
beautiful
Lake,
in
the
there.
I bet.
Millennium Bridge, the Sacred Monkey Temple, the Hellmouth or
I've been
Elephant
there
Cave,
too.
7-story pagoda of Cebu, the
That
smoked
looks
mummy
beautiful.
villages of Aikim
Oh.
and Jiwika in Papua.
Oh,
Or if
that's
you're lazy,
scary.
just go to the Taman Mini Indonesia Indah Park, which kind of has like a bunch of replicas of all the famed sites in Indonesia. Oh, and keep in mind, there's Dutch colonial style buildings all over, too many ancient temples and pagodas to list. But no matter how many buildings and landmarks are built, they will never compare to what Mother Nature has done. Which brings us to... Indonesia's
It's
land
called
is like that
geography.
one ex we all
I'm
had
excited
back in
about
our
this
20s
one.
that we trusted a stupid friend to hook us
Indonesia's
up
very
with. Super
beautiful.
attractive, but almost killed you a few
I
times.
agree.
Indonesia lies
I
on what
wanna
is
live
labeled
there.
as the
Maybe for,
prehistoric
like,
continental shelf
a
known as
month
Sundaland,
or
which
two?
during the Ice Age times
That'd
pretty
be
much
fun.
connected
Yeah.
all of the islands together before the Wallace Line until the ice melted and filled in the gaps. Now this is where things get incredibly messed up. Not only is Indonesia right in the worst part of the Ring of Fire, but the country is basically smashed between three converging major continental plates. The Eurasian, the Pacific,
Oh.
and the Australian plates, with dozens of minor plates and rifts like the Sunda, Timor, Banda, Molucca, and so on.
You
This
still
in
wanna live
return
there?
gives Indonesia over
Not
400
there.
volcanoes, disputably more than any in the world, with over 150 active ones, making it the most
That's
volcanically
scary.
active country in
Yeah.
the world as well. This means on a daily basis, Indonesia experiences on average about 4 earthquakes a day, ranging anywhere between the
gosh.
small,
That's a
timid
lot.
3 to a noticeable 6 on the Richter scale. And you never know where or when they will happen. Impressive. Nonetheless, volcanoes can be a good thing, especially when concentrated close to the equator, as the warmer, humid climate allows moisture and minerals to coalesce, creating some of the most fertile land on the planet. This is why places like Hawaii and Iceland are so radically different despite both being volcanic islands. In the end, Indonesia got blessed with a flourishing abundance of flora and fauna, the second highest concentration in the world after Brazil, many of which being endemic species like the Rafflesia arnoldi
That's
and the Titan
beautiful.
arum, the largest flowers in the world, which each
It's
smell like
very
rotting corpses.
interesting
And at over
looking.
180, they also have the highest concentration of
That looks like a
mammals out of
pig,
anywhere
but
in
a
the world.
bat.
Nonetheless, the national animal is actually a
I've
reptile, the largest
seen
in the
that
world,
there.
at 3 meters long,
They're
the famous
scary.
Komodo
They're
dragon,
really
which you can
so
find a
big.
bunch of on
I would
Komodo
wanna,
Island,
like,
which is
pet
where
it.
they get their name from, and they
They
can kill
might bite
people.
off your finger.
Just a heads up. And the surprisingly not national
Oh,
animal, even though
those are
everybody
so
knows and loves them, the
Baby
only great
monkeys, so
ape in
cute.
Asia, orangutans, are only found on this archipelago as well. By the way, they look docile and quiet, but orangutans can rip off your arm if you anger them. So don't. Otherwise, the
That's
largest
scary.
mountain,
Okay,
Puncak
maybe
Jaya,
I
is
won't pet
located
them.
in the east in Papua. The longest river, the Kapuas, flows on Kalimantan, or Borneo Island, starting in the east, emptying into the South China Sea. The largest lake, as well as the largest volcanic lake in the world, Lake Toba, can be found on Sumatra. This is also the site of the largest speculated volcanic explosive eruption on Earth that essentially
That's
created
scary.
a worldwide volcanic winter. The eruption was so big that you can literally observe ashes from the explosion that went as far as Malawi in East Africa.
Oh my
Remember,
gosh.
guys, Mother Nature is beautiful, but if she wants,
We're
she
very
can
dead.
kill you. Close to Puncak Jaya is Grasberg, the largest gold and copper mine in the world. And on Mount Ijen on Java, which spews out blue lava, all over you can find intrepid sulfur miners that literally go into the base of the volcanic
That
craters,
sounds
risking
terrible,
health just to get raw
walking in
sulfur.
the rocks all
Otherwise, you have other
day.
anomalies
But
like the
was it a
Sidoarjo
gold
mud
that they were
volcanoes,
bringing?
the three-colored
I have no
lake
idea.
Kelimutu in Flores,
Oh, that's
and the
beautiful.
Kakaban Island jellyfish lake. Too many strange places. To this day, Indonesia is the #1 producer of palm oil, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, coconut, and vanilla. Some national dishes might
Oh.
include things like rendang, satay, or satay,
I've
gado-gado,
tried
Looks yummy.
It was
papeda,
yummy.
ikan bakar, pempek, tumpeng, lemang, and the national dish nasi goreng, which basically just means fried rice, which has no exact recipe. You can mix it up and
You might not
kinda do
like it
whatever you want
because
to
it's
Oh, and
fish.
keep in mind,
Oh,
Malaysia
yeah,
might
I don't
argue
like
that some of
fish.
these dishes belong to them, but that's a whole other story tied in with history and culture. We got time. Why not talk about it? Now, there's a lot of curious mysteries when it comes to Indonesia's people. Like, how did they become predominantly Muslim? Or what's the whole deal with them in Malaysia? Or wait, this guy is considered an Indonesian? What? First of all, the country has about 263 million people, making it the 4th most populous country in
yeah,
the
so
world, with
much.
the largest
Crazy.
population of Muslims as well. Now, here's the thing. In a sense, yes, 95% of the population is considered native Indonesian, but that's an incredibly broad term considering that Indonesia has about 300 different ethno-linguistic groups split up across all the
I feel like
island
that
regions
is
of the
very
country.
broad.
If you
I've
look at a
never
map
really
of
heard
the
of that.
actual ethnic
Yeah.
group breakdown, it kind of looks something like this. Nonetheless, the two largest parent ethnic groups are the Javanese that make up about 40%, the Sundanese that make up about 15%. Otherwise, the rest of the population is primarily made up of smaller groups and tribes that have only around 2 to 3% each, like the Batak,
Oh,
the
that's
Sulawesi,
interesting.
Balinese, Minangkabau, Betawi,
I really like
Papuan,
these videos 'cause
Dayak,
they
and so on.
give
Finally,
you a lot
about
of
5% are
information in a
non-indigenous
short amount of time.
Indonesians like Chinese, Arabs, Indians, and even a few Europeans. They also use the Indonesian rupiah as their currency. They use the Type C plug
That's
outlet, and they
cool.
drive on the left side.
You have
of
any
the
of that
road.
one.
Here's where things get a little confusing.
Yeah, I
Culture
have
and language. The one thing
those,
that
I
kind of
think,
unites all
still.
Indonesians is that they share the national language Bahasa Indonesia, which means the Indonesian language. However, Bahasa Indonesia is actually kind of like a lingua franca to many of the people, as Indonesia is the world's largest trilingual country. In addition to Bahasa Indonesia, most people speak their own mother tongue as well as English. Yep, English. They caught on quick when they realized it was the money language. The funny thing is, even though the Javanese make up the largest people group, the Javanese language is not an official language. Technically, it could have been,
Interesting.
but then that would have favored one people group over all the others, which would have caused tension, so they kind of had to choose like a neutral default. Plus, Javanese is like really hard to learn, and the original writing system, although very beautiful, is
Yeah, that's
incredibly
what
difficult to write. Nonetheless,
my
at nearly
tour
100
guide
million
say.
speakers, this
Oh,
makes
really?
Javanese
Yeah.
the largest non-official minority language in the world. And that's why the Bahasa Indonesia language is so strange. It's not even technically indigenous to Indonesia, but more Malay-derived. To this day, people who speak Bahasa Indonesia can understand somewhere around 60 to 70% of what their neighbors are saying in Malaysia. The biggest difference, though, would be the
crazy.
loan words, as Indonesia took quite a bit of influence from the Dutch back in colonial times. For example, kantor versus kantor, doctor versus dokter, mantel, mantel, oma, opa, wortel, Wortel. Speaking of the Dutch,
Oh,
quick history
well,
lesson.
that's pretty
Hindu
simple.
kingdoms, Buddhist kingdoms, Islamic kingdoms. The Portuguese come in quickly, but then the Dutch flock in. Japan comes in for a couple of years and decimates a huge chunk of the population. Independence, Republic, the Suharto years.
Controversial incidents and fights with ethnic Chinese, Timorese, and Papuan peoples. Suharto falls, Reformation period begins, and here we are today.
In Indonesia, all citizens are required to register under one of 6 recognized religion categories: Islam, Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, and Confucianism. If you don't
Oh,
identify
That
with
is
either,
a
then
lot.
sorry. Prior to Islam entering around the 13th century, Indonesia was actually primarily Hindu and Buddhist. It's disputed on how exactly Indonesia became prevalently Muslim. Some people will say that it's because of the Arab traders that came by in the early first millennium. Others will say that maybe it had to do with the Malacca Sultanate conquest that fought against the Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms. And the truth is, both might be right. Inevitably, Bali became like the last sort of haven for whatever Hindus were left. The eastern Nusa Tenggara region and the Papuas remained predominantly Christian, as the Dutch and Portuguese shared the gospel. Islamic culture in Indonesia is a little different from what it looks like in the Middle East. For one, most mosques don't have the typical dome structure, and actually many of them resemble Hindu temples, like the Demak Great Mosque. When a family member dies, their relatives might often come together and pray for a whole week, and then again on the 40th day, and then on the year anniversary, and then on the 500th day, and so on. Also, the night before
Dang.
Eid al-Fitr, the youth
That'd
might
be
gather
crazy
and
to
go
do a whole
around
week
neighborhoods
long.
reciting the takbir. Those are some things you don't really typically find in the Middle East. Clothing modesty customs are pretty loose. Not all Muslim women wear hijabs, however, the ones that do might also complement it with Western clothing, like branded t-shirts with skin-tight sleeves and jeans. When I was in Indonesia, I saw a hijab-wearing woman with short sleeves and capri pants exposing her calves. I was like,
Interesting.
Yeah.
do that? Now, in terms of culture, again, it depends on where you are, and many indigenous peoples still follow ancient traditions.
Yeah.
Everything from
Yeah, I
the
thought they're not
Minangkabau
allowed to
candle
do that,
dance
but
to the
Yeah.
gamelan
apparently do.
players of Yogyakarta, Wayang
sure over time
Javanese
it's
shadow
changed a
puppetry,
lot.
Balinese
Yeah.
festivals, Sumatran pencak silat martial art tournaments, Kenya motif paintings of the Kalimantan tribes, the deadly Pasola game played by
Ow.
Sumba peoples,
I
Katabang
would
cow
not try
racing
that.
on Madura Island, the strange
It's
burial
cool.
traditions of the Toraja people, and everywhere you can find those
What?
pointy longhouses. Otherwise, some notable people of Indonesian descent might include people like
Here.
the
I
first
know.
president Sukarno, Gadamaja, R.A. Kartini, B.J. Habibi, Iko Uwais, Yayan Ruhian, Sisip Arif Rahman, Agnes Monica, Iwan Faz, Anggun, Megawati Sukarno Putri, the Hartono brothers, and YouTubers Brian Emanuel and Raditya Dika. Now, it's so hard to cover Indonesia's culture because there's so many different people groups, each with their own cultures.
bet.
It's insanely colorful and rich. I wish we could cover more, but we gotta move on to some diplomatics, shall we? Okay, so Indonesia is basically like the kingpin of Southeast Asia with the largest population and economy, as well as being a member of the G20. Therefore, they know how to manage relations. First of all, the rest of the Muslim nations in the Middle East generally get along with Indonesia, as they see them as kind of like their strange Asian cousins. Indonesians make up the largest group of pilgrims for the Hajj in Mecca. However, there has been some controversy with Saudi Arabia in regards to migrant worker abuse and death sentences. Since then,
Oh.
Indonesia dramatically decreased its expat programs. The US, the Netherlands, and Australia are kind of like their biggest non-Asian supporters. In addition to trade and business, the US played a huge role in Indonesia's independence, and they worked closely during Cold War times. The Netherlands still holds close ties to Indonesia despite post-colonial bitterness. Plus, tons of Indonesians live in the Netherlands. To this day, they have the second largest population of Indonesians
That's actually
outside
really
of Indonesia
interesting.
after Malaysia at
Yeah,
nearly
it
2
is.
million. Australia gives some of the most aid to Indonesia, especially after catastrophe incidents. And even though there are some controversies involving immigration and attacks on Australians abroad, they still share close ties generally. Now, Indonesia and Malaysia are kind of like the Colombia and and Venezuela of Southeast Asia. They're like the twins separated at birth and have a strange love-hate relationship. Malays accuse Indonesians of stealing their culture and language. Indonesians accuse them of not being grateful for all their help during war times. But when they actually meet up as people, it's like they're totally brothers. Nonetheless, most Indonesians I talked to have said Japan is probably their best friend, which is funny because Japan kind of really messed things up during World War II. Nonetheless, they've moved on, and today Japan makes up the largest export partner. Tourists flock in year-round, and the two have been building each other up for over half a century. In conclusion, Indonesia's people are very much like their islands, numerous with lush, colorful, strange diversity. Sometimes a cyclone, earthquake, or volcano of controversy erupts, but at the end of the day, they still flourish together as one. Stay tuned, Iran is coming up next.
Interesting. That was actually a very informational video. I liked it.
Yeah. Indonesia is a very interesting country.
Mm-hmm.
To the countries that I've been to, Indonesia people are very nice.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, like really, really nice. And their
That's
food is
good.
cheap and it's very yummy. So yeah, I like to live there.
Yeah.
And they have like in there in the beach, the waves is really like
Strong?
strong
Oh,
and
that's
crazy.
scary.
Yeah, it
Well,
was so funny,
yeah.
but nice. But yeah,
Well, if you liked our video, please like and subscribe and comment down below if there's any other videos you'd like us to watch. And yeah, thank you guys for watching.
see you next time.
Bye!